Everyone at Gate B-17 stopped mid-breath. The boarding process paused. Conversations halted. Phones lowered. Eyes locked in one direction. Because something had just happened. Something no one expected. And no one was quite sure what to do next. A black woman stood near the desk. Not shouting. Not moving. Her hand resting slowly on the strap of her travel bag. Not because it was heavy, but because someone had just put their hands on her. The man? Wearing a pilot's uniform, a badge on his chest, a sneer that hadn't faded yet. He just slapped her. Not in the chaos of an altercation, not in defense, but in full view of stunned passengers, security personnel, and airport staff. As if he thought he had the right. And maybe he believed he did. Maybe he thought no one would say anything. Maybe, like so many before him, he expected silence. But what Captain Raymond Ashford didn't know was that the woman standing in front of him, she wasn't just any passenger. She had spent 2 decades commanding respect in a city where many said she'd never succeed. She had broken through ranks, shattered ceilings, and carried more weight than anyone ever knew. She was composed for a reason, silent for a reason. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And in exactly 10 minutes, the same man who dismissed her presence, who mocked her, who struck her, would be escorted out of the terminal in handcuffs. Not because she called for revenge, but because she made one quiet move that would end his career in less time than it takes to prepare him for takeoff. And yet, it didn't start with that slap. It started with a look, a glance, a judgment made in a single second, the kind that speaks louder than any word, the kind that has followed her through airports, restaurants, boardrooms, elevators. But this time, he chose the wrong person. And she chose not to let it slide. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. It wasn't sudden. It had been building. And the warning signs, they were all there. He just chose to ignore them. And for that, he paid the price. Patrice Jordan didn't need flashing lights or brass pins to command a room. She never raised her voice. She never had to. At 47, she held one of the most demanding roles in law enforcement, not just in the city, but in the country. She was the chief of police for the city of Atlanta, not the acting chief, not interim. She was the chief. Her colleagues called her the quiet storm, not because she was soft, but because she led without noise. And when she spoke, people listened. But on that particular evening in Houston, Patrice wasn't thinking about any of that. There were no security details, no headlines, no flashing cameras. She wasn't on official duty. She wasn't there for a press conference or a leadership summit. She was just a mother trying to get home. Her daughter, Simone, 18 years old, brilliant, outspoken, college-bound, had spent the last 3 weeks reminding her that she needed to slow down and rest. "Mom, you're not bulletproof," she'd say. Patrice would smile, like she always did. She'd been told that her whole life, and yet, she kept moving. That day, she'd flown to Houston for a community policing roundtable. A private event. Quietly handled. She liked it that way. No one in the airport recognized her, and if they had, they might have thought she was someone's teacher, or a high-level executive heading home from a conference. She wore dark jeans, white sneakers, a gray hoodie, and an old ball cap from her alma mater. Nothing about her said authority. Nothing screamed command. But that's the thing about people like Patrice. They don't need to be loud to hold power. Patrice's upbringing was carved in discipline. She was raised in Baton Rouge by parents who had seen things no child ever should. Her father, Ernest Jordan, was a Vietnam veteran, quiet, proud, and unflinchingly principled. Her mother, Clarice, taught Sunday school for 25 years. Gentle in tone, sharp in wisdom, and a firm believer that grace wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. By the age of 8, Patrice had already learned how to carry herself with purpose. By 12, she could sit through a room of men talking over each other, listen intently, and offer a sentence that quieted the room. She didn't grow up thinking she'd be a cop. In fact, she'd planned on becoming a civil rights attorney. But one afternoon during her senior year of college, she witnessed a boy being slammed to the ground by a local officer outside a corner store for matching a description. The boy? 12 years old. The charge, nothing. The bruises, real. That moment changed her. She told her father the next day. He nodded once and said, "If you're going to walk into that world, make sure you change it while you're there." She never forgot that. 2 decades later, she had worked her way up from patrol officer to homicide detective to precinct commander. It wasn't easy. She had seen doors shut that were wide open for others. She'd sat in meetings where her ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them. But she kept showing up. She earned her position with quiet consistency. By the time she was appointed chief, even her critics had to admit she was overqualified. But that didn't stop the assumptions. When she walked into certain rooms, the eyes still scanned for the real chief. At speaking events, people often looked at her assistant, expecting him to take the mic. It didn't matter how many badges she earned. Some people just saw her skin. Some people only saw what they wanted to see. But that night in Houston, she was tired. Her connecting flight had been pushed back twice. The line at gate B-17 was long and moving slow. The seating area was packed, the air stale with impatience. She adjusted the strap on her bag, glancing down at her phone. A text from Simone flashed across the screen. "You okay, Mom? Want me to microwave some gumbo for when you land?" She smiled softly. The kind of smile only a mother gives when she's reminded that someone's waiting for her. Someone who worries. Someone who cares. She typed back, "Please, don't eat it all before I get there." She was already thinking about her couch, her slippers, and the warmth of home. No alarms, no meetings, no calls from City Hall, just rest. What she wasn't thinking about was what would happen in the next 20 minutes. She wasn't thinking about how a man in uniform would look her up and down like she didn't belong. She wasn't thinking about how his ego would blind him from seeing who he was really dealing with. And she definitely wasn't thinking about being slapped in front of a terminal full of people. People who had nothing. Not at first. Because in that moment, when it happened, most people didn't react out of shock. They hesitated because they were waiting to understand what just happened. That's how invisible black women are expected to be, even when they're struck in smake. But Patrice wasn't shaken. She had lived through worse. She had walked into precincts where no one wanted her. She had stared down men 3 times her size in interrogation rooms and never blinked. Still, she never expected it would happen like this. Not here. Not now. Not from him. But that's the problem with racism. It doesn't check the room. It doesn't care about your title. It doesn't ask for credentials. It just acts. And when it does, it reveals everything about the person who carries it. Gate B-17 wasn't in chaos. It was just like any other gate during a delay. Anxious energy, too many carry-ons, and people hovering too early in the boarding zone, hoping to be first. Patrice didn't mind the wait. She just wanted a seat upgrade. Her legs were tired, her back ached. She had a long week behind her, and her mind was already halfway home. There were 2 seats still available in first class. She saw them listed on the display above the counter. The airline app confirmed it. She was willing to pay. She wasn't asking for special treatment, just a little peace and space. So she walked up to the counter. "Excuse me," she said gently to the gate agent, a young white man who looked barely old enough to vote. "I was wondering if it's possible to upgrade too." She never got to finish the sentence. From behind her, a voice cut through the air. Loud, aggressive, condescending. "You people always trying to sneak into places you didn't pay for." It sliced through the buzz of the terminal like a blade. She turned slowly. A white man in a Navy pilot's uniform stood 10 feet away. Trim, polished, name badge glinting against his chest. His eyes held the kind of arrogance that didn't come from confidence, but entitlement. Captain Raymond Ashford. She'd never seen him before in her life. But the look on his face, it was all too familiar. The same look she'd seen from arrogant city council members who dismissed her input. The same tone she'd heard in courtrooms when she walked in and someone assumed she was the defendant's sister, not the chief. "Excuse me?" Patrice said, not angry, not shaken, just stunned. Ashford walked toward her with the authority of someone who'd gotten away with things for years, his posture rigid. his tone dismissive. I said, "Step away from the desk. You're not allowed up here unless you're boarding." He wasn't shouting, but his voice carried, intentionally, loud enough for passengers to hear, loud enough to frame her in their minds. Problem. Breaker. Outsider. The gate agent, visibly nervous, didn't say a word, just glanced between the two, unsure who to support. Patrice saw it in his eyes. He was used to siding with a uniform that had wings. "I wasn't trying to board early," she said, voice even. "I was asking about a seat upgrade." Ashford ignored that. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "We've had too many problems with people sneaking into first class," he said. "You know how it is." She didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything he'd said. When she finally spoke, it was with a calm so sharp it cut. "You don't know me," she said, "and you've already made 4 assumptions about me in under 10 seconds. The smirk vanished. "Are you getting smart with me?" he snapped. "No," she said, steady. "I'm just stating facts." That's when he stepped closer. No more than 2 feet between them. Close enough for the tension to thicken. Close enough for everyone nearby to feel something shift. He gestured toward the line behind her. "I don't have time for this. You're holding up boarding. Move." She didn't. She stood still, grounded, rooted in place like she'd done 100 times before when someone underestimated her. But this time, the room was watching, and then, without warning, he slapped her. Not a punch, not a shove, but the back of his hand flicked across her cheek with a casual cruelty. Quick, blunt, deliberate. It wasn't hard enough to knock her down, but it didn't need to be. The room froze, a silence so thick even the boarding announcement stopped mid-sentence. People turned. One person dropped their coffee. A man in a suit whispered, "Did he just?" Someone behind her covered their mouth. Patrice didn't yell. She didn't stagger. She simply stepped back, 1 foot. No panic, no drama. Then she reached into her jacket. Ashford took a half step back, maybe expecting pepper spray or a warning. But Patrice wasn't reaching for a weapon. She was reaching for her badge. She held it high, so everyone could see it. No mistaking it, no denying it. "Chief Patrice Jordan, Atlanta Police Department," she said, clearly, voice unwavering. "You just committed felony assault in public on a law enforcement officer, in front of witnesses, including TSA." His face drained of color. The gate agent looked like he'd seen a ghost. A middle-aged woman across the aisle was already filming, her phone up, hand shaking. A man in a cowboy hat stood frozen mid-step. No one moved. Patrice pulled out her phone next. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. "Airport police," she said into the receiver. "Gate B-17. Assault in progress. Suspect white male, 50s, commercial airline pilot, uniformed." She paused, then locked eyes with Ashford. "You're not flying this plane tonight." By the time TSA and the airport police arrived at Gate B-17, the scene wasn't just tense. It was electric. A crowd had formed. Not a crowd of bystanders, witnesses. People had their phones out, cameras rolling, social media feeds already filling with hashtags. Gate B-17, Chief Jordan flying while black. Voices rose over the terminal announcements. "She didn't do anything," someone yelled from the back. "We saw it. He hit her first." She was just asking a question. He walked up to her. It wasn't just noise, it was testimony. Multiple angles, multiple videos. And the truth was all the same. Chief Patrice Jordan never raised her voice, never raised a hand. She stood still, she stood black. And that was enough to make a man like Ashford swing. Ashford tried to backpedal, his voice loud, panicked, unraveling in front of the cameras. She was being aggressive, she came at me. His voice cracked on the last part because he could see no one was buying it. Not the TSA agents, not the airport police, not even the gate agent, who stood frozen with his hands tucked behind the counter like a kid caught lying. A voice rose from the side, strong, firm, unapologetic. It was a young black man, maybe late 20s, in a tailored gray business suit. "I saw the whole thing," he said clearly. She was calm, respectful. He didn't like the way she looked at him. That's it. That's all. Another passenger, a white woman in her 50s, visibly shaking, nodded beside him. "She never touched him," she whispered to one of the officers. "He hit her. Out of nowhere." The videos confirmed it, from 5 different angles. No pushing, no shouting, just quiet strength met with violent arrogance. The moment it clicked, the moment reality fully settled in, Captain Raymond Ashford's face changed. No longer smug, no longer in control. He looked around and saw something he hadn't expected. He wasn't the authority in the room, he was the suspect. And the uniform on Patrice Jordan's chest? It wasn't just fabric, it was a mirror, a challenge, a truth he couldn't erase with spin. The lead airport officer, a Latina sergeant with hard eyes, didn't hesitate. "Sir, turn around." Ashford blinked. "What? You are being detained for assault. Turn around." "But I'm the pilot." "You were the pilot." Handcuffs clicked, a gasp rippled through the gate. Some people clapped, others just stared in disbelief. It was surreal. A white pilot in uniform, hands behind his back, being walked out of the terminal past the very people he'd tried to intimidate. Some filmed, others simply watched. The gate agent, the young white man who had said nothing, was pulled aside by airport staff. Quietly, quickly. He wouldn't be making a public statement yet, but the silence he'd kept when it counted was already speaking volumes. Patrice? She stood where she'd been the whole time, calm, still. Her cheeks slightly red, but her eyes clear. TSA agents surrounded her like a protective shell. But she didn't need protecting. She wasn't the victim in need of rescue. She was the reckoning. The airport manager arrived minutes later, out of breath, tie askew, sweat visible on his collar. "Chief Jordan," he said, his voice cracking from nerves, "I want to personally apologize. This never should have happened. We're launching a full investigation immediately." She didn't make a scene, she didn't yell, she just looked at him, long enough for him to feel it. Then she said evenly, "I'd like to board the next flight out, and I want the seat I asked for." He nodded furiously. "Of course, absolutely, it's yours." They upgraded her to first class, not as a courtesy, not as a favor, but because it was the least they could do. Passengers watched as she walked down the jetway, silent, proud, dignified. But on every phone, on every screen, the headlines had already started. Atlanta police chief assaulted by pilot at Houston airport. Video shows racial bias, unprovoked attack, flying while black, a national reckoning. And the country? It was about to have a conversation it couldn't ignore. The story didn't go viral, it detonated. Within an hour, the footage was clipped, looped, subtitled, reposted. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, every platform had it. Some slowed the moment of the slap to frame-by-frame silence. Others highlighted the second Patrice held up her badge, calm, clear, unshaken. By 6 a.m., hashtags were flooding timelines. Chief Jordan, pilot privilege, respect black women, flying while black, #gate B-17. By sunrise, the story had crossed borders. BBC, Al Jazeera, France 24. Everyone was covering the same 2 minutes of video. But what it represented, that was the real story. Because here was the first black woman to ever lead the Atlanta Police Department, assaulted in public by a white man in uniform for daring to ask a question. The pilot, Raymond Ashford, was suspended within hours by his airline, Westland Air. The statement was cold, sanitized. "We are aware of the incident involving Captain Ashford. He has been suspended pending investigation. Westland does not tolerate violence or discrimination of any kind." It wasn't enough. By the next morning, Ashford resigned. Quietly, no apology, no press. But that wasn't the end, because Patrice Jordan didn't let it end there. She gave one press conference. No entourage, no stylists, no rehearsed sorrow, just her. Standing behind a podium in a navy blue suit, natural curls tied back, badge clipped to her hip, not her chest, not for show, for truth. The room was packed. National press, local bloggers, airline unions, activists. Even some who had never said her name before were now quoting it like scripture. She spoke. "This is not just about me. This is about what happens every day to people who look like me, who don't have a badge. This is about the assumptions people make, the casual aggression, the unchecked privilege, and the silence that follows." Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled. No one interrupted. "If I hadn't had this badge on me," she asked, eyes moving across the crowd, "how would that have ended? Would I have been arrested instead? Tackled? Shouted down for being disruptive?" The room held its breath. She let the silence sit. "I carry this badge with pride, but my humanity doesn't depend on it, and neither should yours." That line was replayed in every nightly news segment for the next week. And then the dominoes started falling. Airline unions demanded mandatory anti-bias training for all flight crew. Civil rights groups filed open letters demanding an FAA review into pilot conduct and in-air racial bias. Westland Air's stock dropped 11% in 5 days. Protesters flooded their headquarters in Houston. Parents posted videos of their daughters watching Patrice's speech on loop. Educators printed her quotes for classroom walls. Late-night hosts broke from their monologues to say her name. She was everywhere, but not as a victim, as proof. And still, Patrice didn't go on a media tour. She didn't write a book deal. She didn't chase interviews. She went back to work, back to her office, back to being chief. But the work looked different now, because behind the scenes, she was building something bigger. She met with black pilots associations. She sat down with TSA union reps. She called the mayors of 5 major cities and said, "We need to talk about travel, policing, and profiling at airports. Because if it happened to me, it's happening to everybody." And they listened. Because she wasn't asking anymore, she was telling. Raymond Ashford, gone from the skies, no other airline would touch him. A statement finally leaked, written by him to friends in a private Facebook group. "The media crucified me. She overreacted. This cancel culture is a joke." But nobody cared. Because for once, the headlines didn't bend in his direction. The story wasn't about his intent. It was about his impact. And the world wasn't offering him redemption. Not this time. Meanwhile, Patrice's daughter, Simone, posted a picture the day after the press conference. Her mom, in slippers, sipping coffee on their back porch. Caption: "Y'all saw a moment. I've seen a lifetime. My mama been that woman." Over 1 million likes. So what was the revenge? It wasn't fire. It wasn't rage. It was a mirror held up to the world, and a voice that refused to whisper. Patrice Jordan didn't just survive that day at Gate B-17. She made the whole world stop and listen. In the weeks that followed, the headlines faded, but the impact did not. But let's be honest, that wasn't the real shift. The real change happened in the conversations that bloomed beyond corporate walls. It was at breakfast tables, where white parents tried to explain to their children why a woman like Patrice had to hold up a badge just to be believed. It was on late-night walks, where old friends reconsidered things they'd witnessed and stayed silent about. It was in classrooms, where professors paused their lectures to ask, who holds the power in this story, and why? And most importantly, it was on phones between strangers and friends and family, where people asked the uncomfortable, unfiltered question, would I have spoken up if I were there? Because that's what the video really showed. Not just a slap, not just a uniformed black woman revealing her identity, but a litmus test. A single, crystallized moment that asked, what side of history are you standing on when no one's looking? When there's no retweet, no credit, no camera on you? Because while Patrice stood her ground, others stood silent. Some looked away, some froze. But a few said something. A few filmed. A few stepped up and said, we saw it, we're not pretending we didn't. And those few? They mattered. Because silence in moments like that is a choice. And complicity wears many faces. Because that's the truth. She didn't ask for special treatment. She asked to be treated like a person. A human being. With dignity, with respect. But what she received instead was assumption, hostility, and assault, in that order. Not because she was loud, not because she was wrong, but because she didn't look like the people who were usually granted grace. And the man who struck her, the man who wore confidence like armor and bias like breath, he didn't just lose a job, he became a case study, a parable. A national reminder of what happens when racism and unchecked arrogance collide and run headfirst into the wrong one. Because that's what Patrice was. The wrong one. The one who wasn't going to shrink. The one who wasn't going to say it's fine. The one who was going to stand there bruised but upright and say, you don't get to do this. Not today. Not to me. Not to anyone else ever again. And what do you do with a woman like that? You don't pity her. You don't tokenize her. You don't repackage her pain into sound bites. You follow her lead. Because this story wasn't just about justice. It was about memory. It was about the next black woman who walks up to a counter and asks a question, and is met with eyes that have learned better. It was about the power of standing your ground. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with identity, with presence, with calm, relentless truth. In the end, respect isn't something you earn by shrinking yourself. It isn't something granted through performance. It's owed. It's human. It's non-negotiable. And when power meets grace, only one walks away still standing. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world.